Now we will be recording. And then the format of tonight's forum is we're going to start with a presentation, and then we will have a question and answer portion. If during the presentation you think of a question, feel free to just place it in the chat and we can get to it afterwards so you don't forget what the question was. But then you'll also have that opportunity during the Q&A to ask additional questions. And si quieres, puedes mandar preguntas en español por el chat. So thank you again for joining us today. And I'm going to turn it over now to Mark Day, our budget director, and then the other city staff on the call will introduce themselves prior to presenting.
Okay, thanks, Shauna. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark Day, Municipal Budget Director. Thank you for attending tonight's forum. So tonight we're going to give you a brief overview of the budget process for next year's budget and then discuss some current budget issues. So this is just a quick presentation. We want to make sure we have plenty of time to answer questions that you may have about the city's budget or the city's finances in general. So as Shauna mentioned, this is going to be recorded, and we recommend that you use the chat feature to ask your questions, and all this feedback is going to be provided to council as they work through the budget development process. But I just want to let you know that this isn't your only opportunity to provide feedback. We also have an online forum, and we'll give you that web address as we work through the presentation. But this forum allows you to tell us about what you think the priorities should be in the upcoming budget. But we have an open-ended section in there where you can type in your, provide any feedback or comments that you may have. So I just wanted you to know you're not just limited tonight to the chat feature. And then all these comments then will be provided to council. And then we have several upcoming public budget meetings that you can attend and also provide additional feedback. Okay. So tonight, here's our topics. We're going to overview the municipal budget process. We're going to do a review of both the operating and capital budgets. We'll talk about the city resources and needs, both short and long term. We're going to talk about how we gather community input. So not just tonight, but as I mentioned, there's several opportunities for you to provide input. And then we're going to talk about the relationship between community input and city council budget priorities. All right, so we'll start at the beginning. Why do we budget? So probably like your home budget, we have limited financial resources. So we want to make sure we prioritize the needs so that we fund the most crucial things first. And the way we do that is through strategic planning. So we've established measurable standards of service through performance measures, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit here. And we allocate resources to meet those standards of service. And the third bullet point there is statutory requirements. So the state requires that every city and town in the state adopt an annual budget, and that this process be a public process. So as I just mentioned, that is a public process. So here are the public meeting dates, and we also have this on our website, so you don't have to memorize these. But today is February 24th, obviously. We're having the virtual public forum. Then on March 18th, for the capital budget, we're going to come forward with our initial recommended projects for funding. And this is an opportunity for council to discuss the projects that we are recommending, but also for you as residents to provide feedback. And then on April 22nd is the city manager's initial recommended budget for both operating and capital. And that again is another opportunity for you to provide feedback. And then we get through the more formal process, but again, these are all public meetings and you can provide feedback. So May 27th is tentative adoption, and then we have final adoption on June 10th, and then adoption of the property tax levy on June 24th. So I'm going to quickly go through the two budgets. So there's actually two distinct budgets, although they're adopted together, but kind of two separate processes. We have the operating budget. So this is the day-to-day operations of the city, and it's a one-year budget. So think things like recreation classes, solid waste, picking up trash, delivering water, those type of things. So what do we think about when we develop the operating budget? So we want to make sure that the operating budget is aligned to council adopted priorities and tied to performance measures. So we want to allocate resources to the most important needs and priorities of the community. The next thing we have to obviously consider is economic trends and indicators to ensure that we have sufficient revenues to make sound financial decisions and maintain our services before we think about expanding services. And then we think about the needs. What are the needs in to provide those services? And can we increase funding in those areas that are priorities? So this is just a brief overview of the budget. So we'll start with revenue. So the majority of the revenue for the operating side is from local taxes. So when you go to the store to buy something, we do have a local sales tax, and that makes up 41% of the revenue. The other part is user charges. So your solid waste bill, your water bill, those type of things. Or if you take a recreation class and you pay a registration fee, that would be a user charge. We also have intergovernmental revenue. So the state does share a portion of the sales tax, income tax, and vehicle license tax that it collects with all of the cities and towns, and that makes up 21% of the revenue. And then we have this all other category, various miscellaneous revenue that comes in. And what do we spend it on? We have a number of employees, obviously, that takes to deliver the services, whether it's to pick up trash, instruct a class, those type of things. So that makes up 53% of the budget. Supplies and services, think about fuel for vehicles, pool chemicals for the pools, supplies for rec centers, basketballs, those type of things. And we have some miscellaneous debt service, other things, contingencies. So we always set aside a contingency budget. So in case of unplanned expenses or emergencies that would occur. And then we have capital outlay there. So the second budget is the capital budget. So these are the big things. So things that we use to build or improve or expand the city's infrastructure. So think water treatment plants, water lines, fire stations, those types of things. So it is a 5-year plan. So the operating budget is a 1-year plan, but the capital is a 5-year plan. These are large expenditures, and it takes us, we need to really plan out so that we can make sure we have sufficient resources to pay for those. So what do we think about for the capital budget? Well, first of all, the city does maintain substantial asset management plans where we may watch this, the life cycle and the condition of assets to make sure that we replace those assets when they need to be replaced. So the majority of the CIP is made up of maintaining our existing capital program. But every once in a while, we do have some system expansion. So the latest one I can think of is we added fire station number 7. But like I said, the majority of the capital is just main structure that we have. The other side of it is how do we pay for this? So when we think about the capital program, first of all, is there any available cash funding? We want to make sure that we utilize, if we have cash available, can we use that? The other part is, do we have bond authorization? So the residents, U.S. residents, provide us authority to issue bonds. Our last bond election was in November of 2020. We usually go to the voters about every 4 years. The state sets statutory debt limits about how much debt can be outstanding. So we want to make sure we're under those limits. And do we have revenue to repay the bonds? So we have a property tax stabilization policy that helps bring in a steady revenue source, and that secondary property tax can only be used to repay bonds, but we want to make sure we have sufficient revenue. Look at the CIP, similar to operating, we'll go over the source of funds and then what we use them for. So like I mentioned, we issue a lot of bonds. So water, wastewater bonds, which are repaid by user fees, and then general obligation bonds, secondary property tax. pay-as-you-go or cash funding, so that makes up 29%. We also have outside revenue. So we try to leverage where we can, for example, federal grants, programs where we may get some outside revenue to help us with our capital program. And then we utilize fund balances where they're available. What do we spend it on? So transit, 16%. So think streetcar, bus pullouts, those type of things. Enterprise is primarily the water program, so water line replacements, maintaining our water plants. Transportation, those things would be like intersections, street lights, those type of things. And then general purpose, those are usually our facilities, maintaining our facilities, recreation centers. And this just is an overall picture. So for the current fiscal year, the total city budget is 770, almost 778 million there. Capital projects, and then this is just broken out by fund. So the actual budget we adopt, the formal adoption process is about a 6-page schedule. We put together a more formal document that's about 400 some pages, but we've realized that's a little bit unwieldy for our residents. So we've put together this user-friendly document. It's called Budget in Brief. And it just highlights the major sections of the budget. And it's about 6 pages. And this is available on our website. And we'll give you that address at the end of the presentation today. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ken Jones, our Deputy City Manager, CFO.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. As Mark said, I'm the Deputy City Manager, Chief Financial Officer, and I want to reiterate a couple things that Mark said that are really important. We've done these public budget forums for years now, and in person, it's a good opportunity for people to ask questions and express their perspectives, and we always take notes and we deliver those to the City Council when it comes time for decision making. And this year with the COVID-19 restrictions and the online nature of this, I don't want anybody to get frustrated and think that if tonight it's too difficult to give us your perspective, that this is your last opportunity. It's not. As Mark said, we're only at the point of introducing to the City Council potential expenditures. We haven't prioritized anything. We haven't given the council any of the public feedback yet. The public has a lot of opportunity to provide that. And the online ongoing forum that exists allows you to go on there as many times as you want and provide your perspective. So there's a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of time to do that. So I don't want anybody to be frustrated by this format tonight. So with that, I'll keep moving in our budget presentation, which is the other portion of the meeting besides getting your feedback. It is to make you more familiar with the process that the city uses for budgeting. So Mark started talking about the different things that we fund, and this provides some assurance, and people ask these kind of questions of us a lot, so we make sure we include this in the slide so that people understand it. There are different funds where the revenues are separated. There are special revenue funds, which are those dedicated revenues. For instance, we have a transit tax that is a dedicated revenue, a arts and culture tax, which is a dedicated revenue. We receive highway user funds, and those have to be used for those purposes for which they were intended. Those projects don't compete with what's in our general fund, which is, like Mark said, the operational costs that you're most familiar with, the fire and police and libraries and parks and things like that. We also have enterprise funds, which are segregated, which are water and wastewater. So the people who pay water and wastewater fees, those fees are only used to support the water wastewater function. Similarly, the golf, solid waste or refuse, and also our ambulance fund, those user fees that are collected in those funds are only used for those purposes. We don't integrate those funds. Those always stay separate. And then, of course, as Mark began to talk about the capital projects funds and the like. So we want to make sure everybody understands that we get the questions like, if you hadn't built a town lake or if you hadn't decided to build a streetcar, you would be fixing my park. And those are segregated funds dedicated for those purposes. Next slide, please. So this is not meant to be an eye test. This is, Mark mentioned that we are required to do a 5-year plan for capital projects. So for operating budgets, we don't just budget for 1 year and hope that every other year turns out well. This is an example. This is our general fund. And this is an example of how we plan operating expenditures over a longer period of time, even though the state only requires us to budget for 1 year. So what we do is we look at the revenue and expenditure projections, which are in the top left, and all of the numbers on this page are in thousands of dollars. You'd have to add 3 zeros. But if you look at the revenues and expenditures on the left, and you see that expenditures we are projecting to be above revenues for each of the next 5 years. And the reason for that is we saw a decline in revenues both during the Great Recession and now again during the pandemic. And we have fund balances sufficient that we don't have to curtail our operations because revenues are down. So if you look at the chart on the right, what you'll see is we target between 20 and 30% for the entire 5 years for our fund balance. Knowing what was coming, we made some cuts and built up our fund balance so that we are well above policy, so that during this time when revenues are in decline, we will spend down that savings account so that we don't have to curtail services. The rest of this chart, it's actually a tool that we use that is interactive, and this is just a snapshot of examples. So in this example, we're showing adding $8 million of recurring supplemental budget increases in the next fiscal year and another 3, 2, and 2 in the years after that. So what this is showing the city council is you can make these budget decisions in the context of a 5-year plan, and you can be comfortable that our financial stability will be maintained. So this is just, like I said, this is just to demonstrate to you how we plan for the future. We don't just budget for 1 year without knowing how that 1-year budget is going to impact future stability. Next slide, please. So we had a lot of impacts, and as you can guess, the budget is the finances are in somewhat of an unstable condition, only because nobody knows exactly what's going to happen. When the pandemic first showed up, we thought that there would be 10 to 15% reduction in revenues as people started isolating and not spending. There are some things that have changed that a bit, but what we did is we made significant reductions in our budget so that we didn't have to be shocked later and make budget reductions that had tremendous impact on community services. So we did a lot of this by maintaining positions open that were vacant and freezing those until further. But you can see in the general fund, our largest fund, we reduced that budget by about $11 million in preparation. So as I stated, we built up our savings account knowing that revenues were going to be reduced. So we did that. And the hiring freeze and the freezing of positions was a large part of that. Next slide, please. So some of the recent impacts of the forecast, just to tell you what we're seeing, which is we weren't sure what the federal government was going to do in response to this. As it turns out, the city received some CARES Act reimbursement from the state that was directly to reimburse police and fire costs. The city also went out and created recovery initiatives to address some of the most current needs in the city related to COVID of almost $8 million. And then the federal government issued 2 different stimulus checks directly to taxpayers, and those worked as they were anticipated, and people went out and spent money. We couldn't anticipate that when this budget was put together almost a year ago. We didn't know what the federal government was going to do, but that has had a tremendous positive impact on stabilizing our revenues. Now, they're still below last year, obviously, and below what a normal year would be, but those did help. And then some of the other impacts, we know that restaurants are probably down still 25% from what they were originally, and hotels are down almost 50% in revenue from where they were before the pandemic. And those have reduced our sales tax revenues, obviously. There's a voter-approved recreational marijuana. We're trying to get our arms around how much revenue that will generate in the city in terms of sales tax, because those are taxable sales. And then besides the direct stimulus checks, the federal government also increased unemployment benefits, as you know, and that also had a positive impact on the economy that we couldn't have anticipated a year ago. Next slide. Mark is going to talk some more about community engagement. And as I said earlier, please reach out to us with any questions you have, and Mark and Rosa are going to take it from here. So thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Good evening, everyone. My name is Rosa Inchasti. I'm the Director of Strategic Management and Diversity, and thank you for joining us. As Ken and Mark have shared, there's a lot that goes into a budget, but really the bigger picture of all this is we're public servants and we're here to create quality of life for our community. So the budget cycle really starts with all of you, with the community, and gathering that information as far as what you would like to see in your city that informs our policyholders, our council, in helping allocate resources towards those things. So I'm just going to go over a few slides that kind of gives you a little snapshot of the performance-led budgeting, that it's a partnership with the budget office. So our community and business survey, and many of you might have participated in it, is a way for us to gather information regarding what you would like to see in our city and how our city is performing in specific areas. There are also various ways that Shauna and our budget office has outlined throughout the year to try to make sure that people are involved in the budget process throughout the process. Virtual public budget forums, online Tempe forums, there's direct emails that goes to the council, and then council communicators, and that data is all shared with the mayor and council. Next slide. So how does the community input affect the budget? And that's a great question that we are often asked. As I said, it starts with the end in mind, and the people come first. It's people and planning. So the budget starts with the community survey information that's inputted, gathered together and shared with the council. It's looking at our direct measures in our strategic plan and understanding where the performance of the operations of our city is, gathering that information additionally with the council so they know exactly what our goals are, where we're currently and the state of the performance measure in reaching that goal, and what is the gap in order for us to reach that goal. So there's a lot of data analytics that's compiled for the council to start this budget process. Next slide. You may become familiar with these, and we're hoping you are, because this has been a huge lift for our city to make sure that the community is involved in understanding a strategic plan. So it has life, and it's not a static proposal or plan, that basically the community is involved. We have 5 city council strategic priorities. As you see there, they want to make sure we create a safe and secure community. We want to have strong connections with our community. Quality of life is important for all of us. Sustainable growth and using our resources wisely. And obviously, as Ken and Mark shared, the financial stability of our city is very important. Next slide. So just to share with you briefly, if performance.tempe.gov shares with you the strategic plan in details with a lot of data, but I just wanted to share with you perhaps 3 performance measures so it gives you an understanding of the vast, wide variety of things that we focus on in our strategic plan. We focus on things from advanced life support, for example, achieving total response times to advanced life support. Those are calls for cardiac arrest or stroke of 6 minutes or less in 90% of the calls for service. Another one is achieving less than 1 occurrence of graffiti on an average of 4 miles as measured by our annual graffiti audit. If you will look around our city, you will notice that you won't see any graffiti. We have a great graffiti program. Achieve a citywide city and private property tree canopy. Obviously, we want to make this walkable city. So we really focus on partnering with our private properties along with our city and working with our arborists on a tree canopy. So that just gives you a snapshot. Those are 3 of 106 performance measures that we have in the city. So as you can see, there's a lot of work being done in our city to make sure that we're advancing and reaching our goals. Next slide. So if you haven't looked at our community survey, which is online, the results of the 2020 was compiled in September, and that was shared with the council in, I think, November. So just to share with you, there's about 500 and some pages of survey feedback from our community. but it's distilled down basically in the slide that we share with you. So the City of Tempe Community Survey Important Satisfaction Assessment Matrix that you see on your right. And as Ken says, it's not a reading exercise, but it shares with you kind of the high importance or things that people would like us to continue to emphasis on in the next year, and things that are opportunities for improvement. And that is the right side of that quadrant, continued emphasis, and then the opportunities for improvement. And then on the left tells us things that are exceeding expectations and perhaps that they would like us to make sure that we understand is not as important in this coming year. All that is very important data for our mayor and council. So on the left, you will see the bullets: police services, neighborhoods, economic business development, social and human services, and the condition of our streets and sidewalks were some of the 5 highlights of what people thought we should focus on for this coming year. The mayor and council listened to, and we provide that information in a tool that I'll share with you in the next slide. The business survey results takes place every 2 years. So this last survey results was from 2019. Now we'll have the business survey this mid-year. But just as I shared with you for the matrix for the community survey, you will see that on the left column, the areas that they would like us to focus on, this is pre-pandemic, because obviously we didn't have traffic in 2020, but in 2019, the business community said that they wanted us to focus on mitigating traffic, street maintenance, water and sewer services, fire services, and emergency medical and police services. All the public safety aspects of the services we provide are very important to our city and to our business community. Next slide. So one of the tools, or the tool that we have developed in the last few years to help the council looking at everything that we have as far as city operations, how do we create a tool that helps them start distilling all the information and data that we provide in a way that prioritizes what they feel we should focus on as elected officials? We developed a strategic tool for aligning resources in Tempe. So we spend a theoretical $100 to advance council priorities. The council is given the tool, they are given $100 theoretically, and then they distribute that into the areas based on the data that we have shared with them. Then they allocate those $100. It provides a list of all the measures along with the baselines, targets, and survey results of those performance measures that I just shared with you, along with what the community is saying they would like us to focus on in the coming year from both the business and the community. Next slide. So the correlation between community survey, I get asked that question regarding how do we look at what the community is saying. So for example, if they said condition of city streets and sidewalks, our office takes a deep dive into those questions and then identifies what performance measures or what operations of goals that we're working towards helps the council know what specific performance measures we should advance. So for example, condition of streets and sidewalks. We're looking at that, they might advance the pavement quality index, which is repaving our streets in our neighborhoods area specifically. Right-of-way landscaping maintenance may be one of those areas that they advance. Police services was one of the areas that the community said they would like us to focus on. One of our performance measures is the police trust score, that we measure how well our community is saying they feel they trust the community, our police department. And we look at that also by demographics in our community. Social and human services, that's a very broad topic. So we know that we have a few performance measures, but then we look at the responses of people's comments, and we know that it might be homelessness, or they would like us to focus on pre-K enrollment or subsidized housing usage or utility assistance, things like that. Next slide. So the development of performance measure acceleration models. So right now, as Ken and Mark have shared, we're still in the budget process and having those conversations with the mayor and council. The mayor and council went through the START tool and they identified the specific areas they would like to see accelerated. So some of those performance measures that I have shared with you, they have identified and asked us to come back and share if we were going to accelerate those performance measures this coming year to meet the needs of what the community or the business community is saying. how can we do that? How can we reach our target faster? So that is what we will be presenting through the CIP and the operating budget in March. So they take the top priority for the resources based on the council input, and then we work with the city departments to see if we were going to accelerate that, when would be the estimated target date? Can we make that sooner to meet the needs of our community? And then we work with the budget office of looking at, are there additional funds that are needed in order for us to accelerate and reach that target sooner? Next slide. And I'll turn that over to you, Mark.
All right, thanks. Thank you, Rosa. So as we mentioned at the beginning, we have a lot of resources available to you. So I'm just going to go over those really quickly. At tempe.gov/budget, we have a lot of information about the whole budget process and budget planning. At tempe.gov/openbooks, we have a lot of financial information, historical and present information. It's like the city's checkbook if you want to find out where we're spending money, what type of expenditures, that's there. As we've mentioned a few times, we have the online forum, tempe.gov/forum. That is open now through March 5th. And as Ken mentioned, there's a section in there for you to provide additional comments and feedback. And all of those comments that we receive from the online survey will be provided to council. And then as Rosa was mentioning the performance measures, performance.tempe.gov is our portal where you can go out and look at all the 106 performance measures and see how you're doing. This is for the 3 presenters tonight. This is our contact information. So there's our email address and then our phone numbers. So I'll just leave this up for a few minutes, or not a few minutes, a few seconds here. And then that is the end of the presentation. We're going to go ahead and leave this slide up so that we can, if you need to write down where the resources are. And again, at tempe.gov/budget, all these links are there also. So at this point, that concludes the presentation part of tonight's forum. And now we'll turn it over to Shauna, who's going to help facilitate any questions we may have received.
So we don't have any questions yet in the chat. So if anyone has any, feel free to type them in there and then we can read them. So Mark and Ken and Rosa can help us answer.
Thank you, Shauna. And while we're waiting for questions, I just would like to sum up that Mark and Rosa did a great job of presenting the way in which Tempe budgets, which is to focus on outcomes. The citizens and businesses in our community are focused on what outcomes we have, not how much money gets put in what bucket, but what outcome we have. And the city council, as Rosa demonstrated, is on the same page, and the things that they have highlighted as important align very well with what we hear from the public. So this is an opportunity for you tonight to ask us any questions, and we'll be happy to answer them. And please give us your input in any of these other formats that we have outlined. Thank you. Shauna, can you describe for people how they would enter something into the chat in case they're not familiar with this portal?
Oh, sure, absolutely. So if you are on a desktop or laptop, you can hover over your name and you'll see the chat is a little bubble and it's got 3 little dots in it. It looks like the old cartoons with kind of the thought bubble. So you can just click on chat. It'd be on the right lower kind of part, and then on your mobile, then it shows up with that same image right by your name. Okay, we had one come through. Is there a better forum to raise questions about how specific issues are handled policy-wise? So this person read through several of the responses. So when you go to tempe.gov/forum, what's great about the tool is for those who choose to share their answers, you can actually read through and see what their responses and additional comments might have been on the budget. So this person does say that they read through several responses, and it seems many of us are concerned about the homeless problem in Tempe. But I think concerns with how this is handled may be beyond budgeting. Is there a similar forum hosted or planned for policy priorities?
I missed the first part of that, Shauna. Can you read that one more time, please?
Sure. So she's asking, is there a better forum to raise questions about how specific issues are handled policy-wise?
I see. So yes, you're right. If in this forum, if you're telling us an issue, like a large issue, like homelessness, and said, you know, I would like to see this addressed in a better way, then this would be the forum for that. If you have specific conversations that you want to have about detailed operations or things like that, you can definitely send the council, all of the city council members, an email through the council communicator, and you will get a direct response. Typically, the city council members will ask a staff member who's associated with that function to provide a detailed response. So yes, you can do that at any time.
And maybe also, Ken, I don't know if you would have information, but the mayor and council have council committees, and they have one on human services that their first meeting is this Friday. So we can put a link in the chat to where you would find the agenda, but that's also a great place because the mayor and council are looking at policy. And so a lot of times if there's policies they're considering, they'll be discussed on the committee level first. That's great.
Shauna, why I'm seeing in chat a question about a budget shifting to address climate emergencies and.
Yes, that's the next question. So did you not, so
okay.
So yeah. So the next, so sometimes, just so you know, Ken, as well, some of the questions are sent just to the host, who is me, and then some are shared with everyone. So
I got you. Thank
this
you.
one was shared with everyone. Should the budget shift to address the climate emergency more than an average year? For example, urban forestry or transit, are we losing trees at a greater rate than we are planning from extreme heat?
So what Rosa described as those performance measures, and she only gave you a few examples, those performance measures are intended to be measures that will achieve what the city council's aspirational goals are. So when you say, I want a safe city, what does that mean? So the performance measures put that into measurable performances that we go out and see how we're doing. So you are correct that some of the performance measures that we have directly address the climate emergency. So we have tree and shade canopy, we have water preservation, we have reducing our carbon footprint. We have a lot of performance measures that relate directly to that. So what we don't do is say, let's shift a certain percentage of the budget from here to here, because it seems like that's the flavor of the day or the emergency of the day. Instead, we set those performance measures as the ideal condition. So if the ideal condition is 0 carbon emissions by a certain date, then what we go to the city council with is, these are the data that show where we are today and when we expect to achieve that goal. So then the question becomes, based on today's resource allocation or budget, based on that, when will we achieve our goal? And if the city council, in that start tool that Rosa mentioned, if the city council says, we're not satisfied with that, we think we need to accelerate that, we need to move that forward faster, then we come back with budget plans that will address the issue and move it forward faster. So yes, I think you're correct that some of the emergencies that present themselves today, they demand more allocation of resources. And the question is, when do we expect to achieve that goal? So as Rosa said, if you go out and look at the strategic planning process and what those performance measures are, there are over 100 of them, you'll see that they are very detailed in scope.
Okay, next question. Where do the projects in the CIP come from?
So the projects in the capital program, the CIP, come from departments as potential projects. So if a department head, like a transportation department, says, this is the condition of streets, these are the proposals we are putting forward as projects to address the condition of streets. So they come from departments, and they are proposals for potential projects. They can also come directly from city council members. If the city council members feel like they have an idea that is outside the scope of the departments and they want it to be considered, they can discuss it amongst themselves and come to a consensus to add a project. But for the most part, the projects come from departments to achieve those goals that we've set.
And we thank Councilmember QB for joining us, and she has a question. Can you talk about aspects of our budget that can be seen as participatory budgeting?
Right, so participatory budgeting has different meanings to different folks, and I've seen school districts and cities and counties and states that say we're going to do participative budgeting, and they invite people to spend a certain limited amount of funds. I think we want to do better than that. You know, to take $1 billion budget and say, here's $5,000, how would you like to spend it, doesn't seem like participatory to me. So what we ask folks to do is to use the START tool that we put out in our ongoing forum and say, which of those performance measures do you think we should be moving towards? So what we're asking folks to do is not tell us how we would spend $5,000 if you had it, but instead say, where should we allocate our resources? So our budget follows the city council's direction to achieve those ultimate outcomes. The budget doesn't lead. We don't give every department a certain percentage of the budget and say, do the best you can with this. We go to the city council and say, what is that objective that you're trying to obtain? And then we shift budget to achieve that. So for us, participatory budgeting is going out to our online forum, looking at those performance measures that we have and telling us which of those are more important. You could even, if you had an idea, you could write in and say, I propose the establishment of a different performance measure. I think this is a better measure of your success, and we would listen to that as well. So we like people to participate in us achieving ultimate outcomes, not a shifting of one budget resource to another, which really doesn't guarantee an outcome. Thank you for that question, Council Member.
Thank you, Ken. And I will just put a quick plug in for our neighborhood grant program, but we do, Mayor and Council do set aside $275,000 each year for neighborhood initiative projects. And so that's really where, as a community, they can come forward and say, this is what our community wants and needs, and there's some funding to do smaller scale projects. Not on some of the larger scale, like building fire stations and other stuff, but you can still get a lot done. And I'll also put a link to that in the chat for you guys. Next question, how does development pay for capital projects?
Well, there are a couple of ways. Development directly pays impact fees, which go towards us maintaining facilities to be able to address needs. So for instance, if you build a development today, you will have an impact fee for water sewer, you have an impact fee for parks, you'll have an impact fee for public safety. There are certain things that have to be upsized as the city grows, and those are direct impact fees. Besides that, depending on what the development is, if you take a piece of raw dirt and develop it, that increases the property tax that is bifurcated in Arizona. Half of it goes to operations and the other half of it goes to capital projects. So there are a couple ways development contributes to both the operating and the capital budget.
Okay, next question. Are we looking into different avenues to make our communities more walkable other than adding canopy? It seems like the resources needed to both add and maintain trees would be a less sustainable option than incentivizing dense building.
I think we do have performance measures related to a walkable city, but they're in conjunction with the 20-minute city concept, which is it's walking and public transportation and biking and being able to get to those necessities within 20 minutes using some form of either walking or public transportation or bicycling. So I think those are all taken in conjunction, and I think there are performance measures that relate to all of those. Yes, there are more than just the tree canopy.
Can you, next question, can you discuss the potential shifting of select operations from the Tempe Police Department to human service operations for example, expanding Care 7 and the homeless outreach teams.
Right. So as I stated earlier, and this is a great question, and it's coming up routinely all over the country. And what we would never do is say, let's take a percentage of this department's budget and shift it to another department. Instead, what we do is ask the city council, is there something that is more important than a function that is currently being performed, or that we should place more emphasis on? We have done that. We have contributed a lot of resources towards human services in the last several years. When that happened during the budget process, the city council allocated those funds, those budgeted funds, to those human services. For instance, counseling in schools, Care 7 operations, the creation of the Human Services Department was only done a few years ago. We have done a lot of things to create those human services. We've increased our contribution to address homelessness and housing, and all of that is through the process of prioritizing where the funds go. Now, if we had a whole bunch of additional funds coming in, then you might say, just allocate all those new funds over here. On the other hand, if there is something that you see as necessary, which the council have identified over the years, we fund those by taking funding from something else or depriving something else of funding. So we wouldn't say it should come from this department to that department. Once we identify that thing that is most important, that needs most resources, the next step is to look at what is the least important thing that we do. So, and to starve that function of resources. So could that result in some police department functions becoming less important and human services becoming more important? Of course it could, but it could affect transportation and transit and every other department as well. So it's shifting the funding from what is least important based on community input and city council analysis of that, and moving it to the most important.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. So we do still have about 10 minutes, a little bit more left. So if you guys have any, please, we'll pause for a minute and give you a chance to type them in, but feel free to put them in the chat.
Shauna, I just wanted to share with the individual who mentioned or asked a question about the tree canopy and the climate. I wanted also to share and just put it on their radar that it's 3 of the items that the council has identified or wanted acceleration models that will be presented in March and April. Both 418 and 419 are the climate action plans for community and for the municipal energy. And then 411 is the tree canopy, which is also going to be presenting an acceleration model.
And Rosa, can they get the information at performance.tempe.gov, or what's the best way if they're interested?
Performance.tempe.gov. Everything they wanted to know about those items will be on there. And then obviously the acceleration models will be shared with council in March and April.
We did get a thank you for the information, not a question, but a thanks for all your time. It looks like we're wrapping up on questions. So as Mark had mentioned, tempe.gov/forum is open through March 5th. And as I had also referenced earlier, you can go on and see what your Tempe neighbors, your fellow residents are also saying, and if they choose to share. It is an open portal for that. And then all the other websites are there if you want more information. I did put the direct links there in the chat for you.
Thank you for all the great questions from our guests, and thank you for hosting this, Shauna.
All right, so thank you, and everyone have a good night.
Thank you, Shauna. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.